I guess it's time, right? We're scheduled for to go from 11:15 until noon, and my name is Greg Fedorov. As you can see by my designed orange hoodie, I'm currently at Sealy Solutions with the other wonderful orange hooded people, more of whom you can find in the hallway and have free popcorn and play a talking game and win stuff. So it's all really wonderful. Before City, I was with the wonderful people of undergrad, of whom I think none of them are in this room because they're like Drupal gods, right? So hopefully I'll be able to share some of this wisdom that I've learned so far. So this session is called Compartmentalizing Styles with Stylus, right? That's basically a convoluted title for essentially setting up a very quick and efficient and, at least in my opinion, simple front end and otherwise workflow, which should make people's lives a little bit easier. It's aimed at kind of beginner to intermediate level. So if you are some kind of front end god, you probably won't gain very much from this session. But if otherwise, then it might be quite useful. And if you are at all intimidated by the front end stuff, then this is definitely the session for you because this one is kind of not scary at all. So I guess nobody's leaving the room. That means that the audience is just perfect for us. Okay, so who's here heard of CSS preprocessors, right? Like I don't know in this day and age basically writes CSS by hand, right? It doesn't happen anymore. And what is the weapon of choice when it comes to CSS preprocessors? At least in the Drupal world, well, it's Sass, right? It's kind of like the standard, right? But just because it's the standard and it's like, the popular kid right now, it doesn't mean that there aren't any alternatives. Of course, there's the old school, less, right? That's been around. I think that was actually the first preprocessor, and it's still very much popular and very much in use. And the one I'm going to talk about in this one is Stylus. Stylus is like the underdog, a third player, I think, in this whole preprocessor market. And at the moment, it's kind of my own personal weapon of choice because I find it works remarkably well. It's simple, and its biggest advantage by far is the fact that it eliminates a whole bunch of dependencies for you, right? For example, if you're working with Sass, right? Sass really is usually, unless you use a lib Sass, it's a Ruby program, really, right? Which means you're dealing with, you have to have Ruby installed on your system. If you have multiple projects, they will probably be dependent on a certain version of Ruby, which means you must have RVM on your system, which means you must juggle multiple Rubies basically in order to work on multiple projects, multiple themes, in order to have this thing compiling consistently, right? On top of that, we have things like Grunt and Go, which are supposed to make our lives easier, which in turn rely on Node, right, to run. So now we have Node, we have Ruby, we have PHP for the Drupal thing, right? So we have like three different, essentially, languages, and all they do is just, compile CSS. Seems a little bit complicated, right? It's like building a freaking space shuttle to, have it in a mail, right? It seems a little bit ridiculous. So with Stylus, because it was initially invented as a Node program, right? You only have one dependency, which is Node, right? So if you have Node in your system, you basically said you can use Stylus, you can use Gulp, you can use Grunt, and all the other plugins that come from that NPM universe, and you're doing now your CSS stuff simply with Node and nothing else, right? And in my experience, Node upgrade path is a little bit smoother, right? So when a new version of Node comes out, it rarely, if ever, breaks older stuff, right? Because I think the standards are slightly higher, in my opinion, than those, right? So I find that, from that perspective, Stylus is kind of a clear winner when it comes to choosing which front-end workflow you should go with. I'm not saying that this is you must go and use Stylus now, but I'm just saying if you haven't picked your weapon yet, consider this one because it does a good job. So as you can see, my presentation is a blank background, which is not very presenty, right? And the reason for that is because I wanted in this session to kind of do like a quick actual show you some code, actually do a quick demo, like a bit of a tutorial, right? So I'll be sort of typing coding on the screen and things will be happening. Hopefully nothing goes wrong and then we'll in fact will, not visit us here. So let's try that, right? So without further ado, open the terminal and we'll spin up a version of Drupal, right? I'm a bit of a latecomer to Drupal 8, because most of our clients that we're working with still have legacy Drupal 7 systems, and even some new clients still rely on Drupal 7 because, of course, not majority of the modules haven't yet been ported to Drupal 8. But since we have a blank slate here, I figured, why not try Drupal 8, right? So we'll be doing that. Hopefully that goes well for us, right? So first and foremost, let's spin up a quick Drupal 8 instance for us, right? So this machine considered to be basically blank, right? All it has right now is PHP, which Mac operating systems comes with. It has Node, which was installed using root. And it has Gulp, which was installed using npm. Everybody not losing anybody yet? No? All right, perfect. So basically, if you had a Mac in front of you right now, you could probably type the same things and it will theoretically behave similarly to what you see on the screen. Right, so in order to spin up an instance here, there's our folder, and let's make a quick Drupal 8 instance. So this command here is drush qd. Qd stands for quick Drupal, or the other alias for it is qt, right? Because qd kind of sounds like qt, right? So however you want to remember it, those things will work, right? Then we'll say server and give it a host name and a port. That means that our local instance will run using that host name. If you don't provide one, it will just use 127.0.0.1 port 8888 as a default, right? And we'll put it in a folder called Drupal 8, and we'll answer yes to all the prompts. So this is what this command means. It's still connected to Wi-Fi, so should now be downloading things for us. As you can see, the command being executed right now is curl, so it is doing just that in the background. Hopefully the internet is not. Why am I connected to guest WeTime? Hold on a second. I guess my machine does not want back in there. And there she goes. Anybody tried that before? Drush qd? No? Yeah, this is actually a very little known Drush command, but it's immensely useful, right? Because all you have to do is basically open terminal, type drush qd, right? All that does is it will spin up a local Drupal instance of the latest version if you don't specify a core, right? So it will be a Drupal 8. And it will use an SQLite as its database, so you avoid the whole setting up a MySQL server and stuff like that. It'll just use a file database, SQLite 3, and then it will use PHP's built-in web server to actually run it for you, which is immensely helpful, right? So you don't have to worry about setting up servers, setting up environments, or any of that stuff, just so that you can see what Drupal is like. Or you want to say try a different version, right? Let's say you're working on Drupal 6 and you say, hey, Drupal 8 is out. Let's see what that's all about. Drush qt done, right? It's running on your machine, you can play with it, you can do whatever you want. So this is now running basically a server for us. This is what it says. It's created as a user name with a username admin with the password of this string right here. It says, congratulations, you installed Drupal. Wonderful, right? And this is our host here because this is what we said it should be. So let's go take a look and see what that actually looks like. Let's see if the drush is lying to us. No, it's not lying, right? So there's Drupal 8 instance, and let's log into it using our username and password that drush has set, has created for us. So there's the password, username, admin.
I'll close the door.
Yep. Okay, so there we are, logged in. This is a default Drupal 8 instance. As you can see, it's not rocket science, right? Basically, blank machine, rush PD, there's Drupal. You know, play with it, break it, do whatever you want with it, right? And you know I'm not lying because if we actually look at the folder structure, right? It has made this thing for us here called Drupal 8 because that's the folder that we instructed it to make. This Drupal root thing that was made by the first time we tried the command, but I didn't have internet, so it kind of made that. So ignore that. We actually remove. Yeah, there they are. And Drupal 8 is just your normal. Basically, there it is, right? The folder structure for the entire Drupal core 8 is right here, and this is what we're seeing in the browser right here. Okay, so since this is a default, and I don't really like defaults too much, especially the administration theme, I think it's rather clunky and awkward. So let's get something better. To do that, again, we'll just simply use drush, right? Since we are now in the path of our Drupal 8 root installation, we'll do drush, enable, and some of these modules that I find are kind of like must-haves. Them being DS, display suite, add minimal theme, there's a wonderful administration backend theme, and add minimal admin toolbar, which comes with that minimal theme, so that the toolbar, or aka nav bar in Drupal 8, and the rest of it kind of jive together nicely. Since we are enabling them and we're saying yes to all prompts, it will download all those modules as well as their dependencies and enable them as needed, right? So it's basically a one-line, you know, kill many birds with one stone, right? Idea. So now if we refresh, there they are, right? So now the navbar looks a little bit more presentable. If I was to lower the resolution, but we're limited to VGA here because this is a VGA cable, when it goes to the top, it acts a little bit better because Drupal 8's native navbar is a little bit clunky. It doesn't really have any of those drop downs or any of those nice things that we had with admin toolbar in Drupal 7. So the minimal admin toolbar kind of brings that thing back and makes it a lot more usable. And let's set add minimal as administration theme as well. There we go, a lot more pleasant to and easier to buy, in my opinion. Okay, so then you ask me, where does this stylus business come in? Well, it's time to make a theme, right? Because right now we have nothing. How boring, right? Boring. So, in order to make a theme, let's put it there. Basically, what I did prior to this, it's like the only preparation I've done because I only had basically last night to get ready for this session, is to make a super quick, super basic Drupal 8 theme, right? And kind of put my gulp file into it so that we actually have something to play with and actually compile some styles. So I know it's a bit of a cheat because I'm not making it on the fly, but I hope you forgive me. Okay, so then if I go to themes, there we are, and this is the theme that I just made earlier. There it is, called DrupalCamp Demo. Let's see what that looks like. So there we are. DrupalCamp Demo, and let's open it in our editor. There it is, right? So there's the basic structure for the Drupal 8 thing. So Drupal 8 now uses YAML files instead of simply info files for basically everything, right? But the structure is not that different, right? So DrupalCamp demo.info, this is where Drupal 7 would have kind of left it. Now we have an extension, YAML, right? And the inside, the top part, identical to Drupal 7 structure. But we get to define extra things here, and the formatting is slightly different. Here we say library. As you can see, that we're not defining style sheets or JavaScript or any of that stuff in here because we're defining a library right here, right? And this library thing comes from libraries YAML file right here, and it looks like this, right? Basically, I'm just saying, hey theme, I have this CSS file, use it, right? That's pretty much all there is to it. There's also a third file called DrupalCamp.layouts.yaml. And this one is slightly more complicated because essentially Drupal 8 has this layout system now. And that's not limited to display suite or panels or anything like that. Layout is kind of like closer to the core. And blocks, for example, could use different layouts, or nodes can use different layouts. And this is where basically we define when it comes to the theme itself, right? So in this case, we define the layout with that's machine name, DrupalCamp demo, and the label DrupalCamp. Category, that's of course going to be whatever we want. Class is not a CSS class, it's a PHP class. And we're telling it that this layout is of type display suite, right? So it's found in Drupal, this is the namespace for that class. And type, there's a number of options there. So there's partial, meaning it could be used for a block or a node display, stuff like that, right? So something that's part of the page. And it's full, which is essentially, including all the HTML tags and stuff like that. So it will generate a full server-going response, right? So full page. And there's a third type, and I don't remember what that was, but you can look that up on Drupal.org. It all describes that there. If you just search Drupal 8, create custom layouts, and it'll all be covered there. Then we specify where the template can be found. This template is simply a Drupal display suite template, right? Just like the old display suite in Drupal 7, where you can say, Drush, generate me a custom display suite template, and we'll do that for you with regions and everything. Same thing, except now it's a twig format, right? Because Drupal 8 likes twig. Essentially the same idea, right? So we have our regions left and right here, with a left and right wrapper, and a total outer wrapper. Of course, you can add whatever markup and whatever extra variables you may need, and they'll all be found there. It has the same libraries YAML file, just like the theme itself. And here, no, never mind, this file shouldn't even be here. No. And then the same thing, right? It has a PNG file, so if we want to have a thumbnail, for example, this is the file right here, right? And all of these things are defined in the layouts, right? When we say that the icon is our icon file, that's the CSS for it, and that's the template for it. So the whole compartmentalizing styles part, where it's going to, is basically essentially this covers it. I think 90%, right? Because as you notice, we have theme CSS file right here. There's the print and the screen CSS. And the layout has its own CSS file. The layout CSS file gets only loaded and used whenever this template is used, right? And that's I think, the wonderful and often ignored thing, right? Because in a mature project, let's say somebody throws in a new panels layout that has 3 columns or something like that, right? And the themer will probably just simply go to the main theme CSS file or whatever the preprocessor equivalent and throw all those classes and layouts in that file, compile it, it works, wonderful, off it goes, right? And let's say that panel 3 column 1 gets only used on one page out of the whole site ever, right? But guess what? It's now rolled into the total theme CSS, so it's always there, whether it's used or not, right? With this approach, where we have our template for this display suite layout, this CSS will only get loaded when this template is used, right? So we're not bloating our theme CSS with unnecessary, just in case, let's have everything there kind of stuff. It's all kind of in its own little bubble, right? We're keeping the templates and the CSS together, and these templates tend to grow really, really, really a lot. At least they should if you're approaching it correctly, right? Because with Drupal 8 blocks, right, they can support their own fields and field templates and display templates as well. So feasibly, if you're building a Drupal 8 site, every single block could use its own template, meaning that the CSS that gets loaded on the page only is that which is relevant to that page and to the blocks which are getting rendered on that page, right? Which should ideally keep everything nice and simple. Now, how do we actually go about compiling that CSS and making sure that this CSS file, which is coming from this file here, this funny extension, style or stu, if you know whatever language you use to, Finnish or English, right? This is the source for this file right here, right? While in our general theme CSS, right? Styles here is the source for whatever ends up in the .css. So as you can see, we have multiple sources, multiple destinations, spread out over multiple subdirectives, right? Sounds a little bit crazy, right? Well, it's actually not, because we have our helpful little gulp file right here, which takes care of all that stuff. I will do a quick demo, which is how that works, so that you can see, so you don't have to take my word for it. And then we'll go over detail over this the structure of this gulp file. Right now, if I was to run it, it wouldn't do anything because, well, it's just a blank theme and we're missing our node modules, right? If you were to use the system or this approach, you could use whatever packages you feel are necessary, right? So of course, in order to install all of these, we have to run npm install. So what this will do is look if, and try to find the package JSON in the current folder, which is there, and then walk through those packages we've defined, the versions we've defined, and download them and their dependencies. So this is what it's doing right now. So basically, if this was Compass project or a SAS project, we would have be dealing with gem files, with log files, with the config.rb files, and all sorts of other craziness, right? So multiple dependencies in multiple systems. In this case, everything is basically in package JSON, right? Just one file that defines what is necessary to compile this project. Okay, so now we're done. So what it did was basically create this new folder for us, node modules, right? This is typically not included in any of the Git repositories, right? Because it will just bloat the repository unnecessarily, and every single npm instance will regenerate this folder structure identically based on what is defined in the package JSON. So now that we have that installed, we can run our gulp and actually compile some CSS. Let's try that. So it's just gulp. And there it is, right? It's running two tasks. One is watch, and the other one is just default. As you can see, if you are used to compiling SAS, these numbers are terrifying for you, right? This is how long it takes to compile these files into actual proper valid CSS. It's like basically insanely fast, right? Because it doesn't have to translate between various different things or deal with a huge, gem library in order to do its thing. It's like, okay, it's a quick little node program that just, boom, it's done, right? Milliseconds. Even like with the code base roast, with like thousands of lines of stylus code, it takes usually well under a second to compile it into CSS, at least in my experience. Okay, so we don't need that just yet because our template is actually not getting used for anything right now. As you can see here, if you recall back, here we're still using Bardic, right? But we've just put a new theme in there, so let's actually go ahead and set that as our default. So there it is. DrupalCamp demo, install, and set as default. All right, so now our home screen will look a lot uglier because, there it is, right? It's a blank theme. It doesn't have anything. It has some green text, blue links, and just basically nothing else, right? Now, when it comes to that DS template layout that we've defined, let's actually put it to good use, right? So if you go to content types, this Drupal 8 instance, because we used Drupal Drush Query Drupal to spin this up. By default, it will use a normal installation profile, meaning it provides you with some basic fields and some basic content types. Two of them being basic page and article. So for example, article, let's set it to use our label that we've defined. So go to manage display, And in the bottom here, where we select layout, but we need to rebuild caches first. Never mind. That's not hard. So drash CR is basically the equivalent of drash CC all for the Drupal site. Let me refresh this page. We now have our custom and DrupalCamp template available. So I select that and hit save. If you recall, our template defined two regions, left and right. And here they are, right, left and right. So let's say left will contain title. I wish the screen resolution was slightly higher. Let's see if I can bump it up just temporarily. The recording has stopped, so here we need to do it. Yes, this is all set. Okay, it's in there. So let's say the left region will have our title, our author, these things we don't need. Body will be on the right, right? So just so we have something to look at. And save. And let's switch the resolution back to VGA so that we can continue recording. Okay, so now basically we've set up the default display for the article to use the custom display suite layout with the left and right sections, right? So now let's go ahead and actually create a new article. We'll call it first article. And we'll throw some text in there. Something like that. Let's hit save and publish. So there it is, right? It has a blue background. The basic page of Drupal did not have a blue background. If I go home, right, I have a white background. If I go to the article, ooh, it has a blue background. Why? Well, it's because when we're in the article, right, we are also loading that extra CSS file that came with the template. Hence, it looks totally different, right? While on the home page, this blue nonsense, right, it's not there, so we're not blowing unnecessarily our page displays. We're only using CSS which is relevant for our displays, because our CSS is contextual, right? It's attached to the layout. So if the template, our custom GS template is in use the CSS. If that template is not in use, ignore the CSS, don't even load it, right? So, in my opinion, I think that's like really awesome, especially if you have many blocks and each block uses its own template and each block has its own CSS attached to it, right? So you're not throwing everything just in case into the theme's CSS file. It's all kept in their little kind of tiny bubbles, right? But then you may be thinking, you should be thinking anyways, if we have all these multiple sources with multiple destinations, right, then aren't we missing the whole advantage of a preprocessor, such as big sense, variables, extendables, all the shared kind of code that is, available for a single source and a single destination? Well, the answer is no, not really, right? Even though this source here is in a completely different folder and its destination is in the same folder in this case, right? So DrupalCamp.stu ends up in DrupalCamp.css. Thanks to the Go file, our mixins, our variables, our globally defined things are still available to this file here, right? So if I go, for example, to my variables file, and I define the color, and let's say we'll call it DrupalCamp yellow or something like that. It'll be just plain yellow, right? And we hit save. Is it compiling anywhere right now? No, probably not. So let's compile it. Yeah, there it goes. Now look at these numbers. Awesome, right? So we define the variable here. Variable is in a one folder structure, right? And it's defined here in global. If we go to DrupalCamp tool, guess what? This variable should be now available to me, right? So if I grab color and I now change it to DrupalCamp yellow, and hit save, nothing explodes, right? It compiles fine. And if I look at the first article, it should be yellow, but it's not. You know why? Because by default, it's caching and aggregating CSS, which we don't want to do. There it is, right? Yellow. So basically, even though these two files are in their own little isolated bubble, all the globally defined stuff is still available to them, right? So I don't have to do things 3 times over, or the code stays basically dry because of that. Anybody excited about this so far? You look really bored. And she's like, yeah, I've done this, right? What do you guys think? You want to add anything? Have you done this before? Or maybe have you thought of a better way to do this? Or am I talking Greek to you, basically?
How does the performance, like when you start adding more style files and creating more CSS files, how does it behave? Because I have been using Gulp and SAS. And it starts to be a bit slow when you have multiple SAS files. It compiles them to different CSS files.
That's what I find. That's the issue with SAS, right? Like it doesn't really scale really. One way to solve that for SAS is to switch to libsas as your compiler, because libsas is a C basically library, right? Which is significantly faster than running, a gem set from Ruby. So that will speed that up for you for sure. But stylus, I find, even with a large number of source file, compiles like really, really fast. I've basically never seen it go over like a couple of seconds on really complex projects.
Okay.
So definitely give that a shot from a performance perspective. Yep.
What about caching? If you have separate CSS files for separate components, so then you cannot cache the one single compiled CSS file.
Well, there are advanced caching and aggregation modules, right? Such as add-bag, for example, right? So what will that do for you is create multiple cache bins, multiple aggregates, basically, essentially per page, right? So that solves that for you. You still have your zip and minified CSS file, which is an aggregate of all those things, but it's an aggregate sort of per page.
And still the user has to load different CSS file per page. If they have different CSS components.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you, right? Like the first guy said, being radically transparent and then open. I'm all for that, okay? So, but then, I guess you could look at it, there's advantages and disadvantages to both, right? And then on the one hand, yes, we could just give them, the universe, and it's all preloaded and cached in the first request, but then, of course, you don't have to load it again, it's already there, right? Yeah, that's one approach, but on the other hand, if you're a mobile user, right, are you going to thank me for that? Probably not, right? I would rather have a couple of page loads with smaller total size than, loading the universe for me, and not having to do it again. Well, it just kind of depends on what the priorities are, right? So let's take a quick look. We have a few minutes still. I should take a look at the actual dump file here. So how this magic, right? How that works, right? Oh, by the way, dump file also supports now stylus. Its one biggest drawback, in my opinion, was its lack of support for source maps, right? So that has been recently integrated into the latest version. So now you can have your source maps in line or otherwise, just like any other kind of, a big boy preprocessor, and it'll just work. See right here, right? For example, this color green and font size 1 rem is defined in some component dot, style file, right? So basically source maps, wonderful thing, we work with style stuff. And it's a relatively new thing. And gulp file, right? There it is. As you can see, it's relatively short, only 81 lines, and it does all of that wonderful stuff for us. How does it do it? Well, first, of course, we define gulp itself. There's also browser sync running. I'll do a quick demo of how browser sync works in this case and how awesome it is. And it's kind of something that goes with browser sync really well. It allows you to pass arguments to gulp and gulp perspectives. These plugins are automatically loaded with gulp plugins, right? So if in package file a thing has gulp in front of it, it will be loaded automatically for us, so we don't have to write multiple lines of require this, require this, require this. This is a server URL. This is something that we can pass as an argument to gulp. And if it's not available, we'll use this one. This can be, of course, up to you, depending on the project, right? Here's some quick configuration to make our life easier later on down the road. So we say where our CSS files are, where source files are, and where the layout files are. And then we have two tasks. One is styles, one is layouts. So what this means here is that basically we tell gulp, hey gulp, my sources, paths, styles, which we define right here, which is this folder, right? And look at, on the first level in the directory, anything with the extension style. Then you take that and you pipe it over to source maps, initialize those, then pipe it over to stylus, and this is the key part here, right? We instruct stylus what it should know, right? So it should know that it has paths available to it, search paths. One is node modules, so this is where all the extra plugins and libraries are and stuff like that. And the other one is styles underscore bloat, right? This is stuff that lives here, right? So of course, this folder can be named anything. It's just that this value has to reflect that. Okay, so whatever files are inside here, it will look for them, right? And then it will import. We tell it to import things, right? When we tell it to import things, it will use the defined search paths to look for these things and import them. These can be whatever you want, right? So in this case, we're importing variables and mixins, these two files here, as well as we're using Jeet. Jeet is a grid system library for styles. In my opinion, it's really top-notch, and it's very simple. I like simple things, It's basically, you can learn it in like 5 minutes and use it for the rest of your life. And Rupture is a breakpoint library, also very simple and fast to pick up. And we tell it to also include CSS so that we can import static CSS if need be. Right? Then we pipe that over to our prefixer, which will basically take our CSS and according to this settings, do the vendor prefixes for us, basically after the CSS has been compiled, which is quite handy. And then back to source maps, where we write them to the inline to the same file as the CSS. If we want to write maps to a different file, we will define that in between these two brackets here. So we'll say maps in a separate file if need be. And then we tell it, hey gulp, we're done now. Put that into paths CSS, right? Which is simply writing a CSS folder. So this is what happens on the styles task. The layout task is basically identical, but the only difference is that the path is now different, right? So the source path is in paths layouts, and in this case, this is another handy thing about the gulp workflow, that it supports like these kind of things, right? This means basically any subfolder, so it will follow the full directory structure all the way down, all the way down to the turtles or whatever down there, right? And we'll grab all files of the extension style and do the same thing, basically compile that, and as a destination, paths layouts basically use the same folder where you found the sources, right? So we can have multiple layouts using exactly identical libraries, so all the power of our grid system, our breakpoint mixins, our variables, and everything else will be available to every single layout file, even though it lives in kind of a different place in the total directory structure. This defines our watch tasks, so that watch these files here for changes. So anything with an extension style and compiler. And finally, last but not least, we have our browser sync task, which is quite handy, which I'll do a super quick demo of since we have 5 minutes left. So I can say dump serve, right? So what that will do is basically spin up a browser sync session for us, right? On top of the server that is provided by Drush, right? And here it is. Basically, it's exactly the same, but what that will do is basically live reload our site for us, right? So if, for example, we now change our style here from DrupalCamp yellow to black and hit save, it will automatically refresh and inject that CSS into the browser. So basically it's always updated. Another thing that it will do is synchronize. This is like a really, really cool part. It will synchronize this screen to any other device which is connected. See right here it says external. So if my phone was on the same Wi-Fi network right now and I go to this IP with this port, I will see this. And as I scroll on my browser, I will see my phone scrolling automatically at the same time. As I click through the site, same thing will be happening on the phone. So basically, if you're developing a responsive layout, you could be compiling one thing and basically watching 3 screens, and they will all be doing the same thing as you're doing it on your desktop browser. Everything, all those events will be sent to all the other devices connected, and they will kind of repeat their thing, right? So you can very quickly see what's happening on each kind of device. So you can have a Windows phone, you can have an iPhone, you can have an Android tablet, and your browser instance running with browser sync, and basically see it all happening all at once without having to hit refresh anywhere at once, right? So that's kind of like the browser sync that is defined in simply a couple of lines right here, right? All of that magic stuff happens. We have 2 minutes left. I hope I didn't bore you to death, and I hope you learned something. And you guys have any questions? If no questions, then next on the schedule is lunch. And thank you for your time.